In the final days of the Second World War, American troops discovered a vast hoard of secret Nazi files hidden in a cave in central Germany. The documents reveal one of the Third Reich's most shadowy projects, the hunt to discover the lost Aryan civilization from which the Nazis believed they had descended. Drawing on previously unseen photographs and archive film, this is the extraordinary story of a global search for the lost island of Atlantis, an expedition to find traces of the master race in Tibet, and an astonishing Nazi quest for the Holy Grail. At the end of 1938, the world stood on the very brink of war. At the height of its power, Hitler's Germany was preparing for action. But even as the battle lines were being drawn in Europe, the thoughts of one of the most senior Nazis, Heinrich Himmler, were focused thousands of miles to the east on a small band of German adventurers. Picking their way up an isolated Himalayan pass were 5 of the Third Reich's best and brightest young scientists on an expedition that Himmler hoped would rewrite the history of the world. On the evening of the 22nd of December, these 5 SS officers made camp miles from civilization on the shores of a deserted lake. Gathered round the fire, they celebrated the winter solstice and toasted their imminent success. Against all the odds, they had reached the borders of the ancient kingdom of Tibet.
Tibet had been the land of mystery for centuries. It's a faraway place. It's very difficult to travel into. They're heading for Lhasa, the holy city, the legendary mythical city of Tibet. No German expedition has ever succeeded in getting to Lhasa before.
But Himmler harbored altogether more sinister ambitions for the mission. His true purpose was to find the proof for one of the Nazis' most fundamental and dangerous beliefs.
Hitler saw world history in terms of the struggle between races for the survival of the fittest, and he thought that races were distinct. So there's an absolute distinction between the Aryan race, by which he basically means the Germans, and the other different races, all of which were inferior in one way or another. The Aryan race were a master race.
Hitler's belief in a historical Aryan master race was unshakable. Since the early 1920s, he had made his belief in the hierarchy of races one of the central pillars of Nazism. But he had a problem. This ancient master race had left behind no archaeological trace, no artifacts or ruined temples. This missing evidence was of particular concern to one of Hitler's most loyal servants, Heinrich Himmler, who made it his personal mission to find it.
Heinrich Himmler's father was a schoolmaster, famous for his pedantic and authoritarian manner. And Himmler, I think, imbibed some of that extreme, almost parody of the schoolmaster character. He was extremely pedantic. He was very, very meticulous in everything he did.
Himmler was determined to prove the existence of an ancient Aryan master race. So when in 1936 he was invited to a presentation at the home of an eccentric historian, he hoped he was finally on the verge of a breakthrough. The scholar's name was Hermann Wert, and that night he proposed an archaeological expedition, which he promised would deliver irrefutable evidence of an ancient Aryan civilization. It was a trip that was the culmination of years of research. Wert had studied ancient symbols carved into caves and rock faces from all over the world and found repeating patterns. Although the traditional view was that they had been made by different cultures at different times, Wert proposed that something truly momentous had been missed. He believed that the symbols from different countries thousands of miles apart were too similar to be explained away as simple coincidence. They must come from one shared source, a lost civilization. Scouring the history books, he found a story that he believed fitted in every detail. The lost civilization must have originated on the mythical island of Atlantis. The legend was true.
Wert located Atlantis as an own continent west of Portugal and southwest of Great Britain Island. People lived there in peace and harmony. It was a kind of ideal life. It was his paradise.
But this paradise had not lasted. Wert believed that Atlantis had met its end in a devastating global catastrophe. The seas had risen and drowned the island. It had sunk out of memory and into myth. But Wert contended a few brave Atlanteans did survive and set sail for the high places of the world.
They wandered onto both sides of the Atlantic, and they took with them their culture.
Wert argued that these displaced Atlanteans had seeded great civilizations all over the globe. Wert's vision of a drowned Atlantis captivated Himmler. It provided the perfect solution to the problem of the missing Aryan archaeology. Now all Himmler needed was the physical proof, and Wert would help him find it. Together, Himmler and Wert formed a new department of the SS, dedicated to researching their Germanic heritage and writing the Aryans into history. It was known as the Ahnenerbe. It would launch expeditions all over the world, from the frozen forests of Finland to the desert temples of Iraq. And the very first project Himmler agreed to fund was Wert's own mission to catalogue a lost Aryan script. A script he hoped would become the foundation of a new Nazi religion. In 1945, the files of an SS research institute known as the Ahnenerbe were discovered in a cave in central Germany. Amongst the many expedition reports were the details of one of Heinrich Himmler's strangest obsessions, a project to replace Christianity with a new Nazi religion.
He despises Christianity. He thinks Christianity weakens people. Above all, according to Himmler, Christianity was essentially Jewish.
To help replace this Jewish faith with a true religion, the Ahnenerbe launched an expedition in the summer of 1936. Led by one of Germany's most controversial archaeologists, Hermann Wert, a team of SS men traveled to a remote region of Sweden to examine a series of mysterious rock carvings. That summer, the expedition made over 100 plaster casts and shipped them back to Germany, where Himmler eagerly awaited. Wert's conclusions were categorical. These carvings were not simply the etchings of prehistoric people, but were, in fact, part of the sacred religious texts of the lost Aryans of Atlantis. This text was what Himmler had been waiting for, a vital weapon in his mission to replace Christianity with a new Nazi religion.
Himmler wanted to press forward with the idea of a Germanic religion, involving things like sun worship, the worship of the old god. He thought he was genuinely researching an archaic Germanic religion.
He began his religious project in miniature, inside the ranks of his beloved SS.
Heinrich Himmler had immense ambitions for the SS. It wasn't simply a police force. He wanted it to be the model for a future Germany.
Himmler established SS weddings and a naming ceremony to replace christenings. And he even instigated pagan-like rituals at each of the solstices.
By going back to the old Germanic religion and infusing the SS with its spirit, he would, of course, strengthen their will. So Himmler certainly did want the SS to become a kind of a cult.
Himmler enshrined into his SS the myth of their own racial superiority. They were his new Aryan aristocracy. The spiritual headquarters of this new knighthood was the medieval castle of Wewelsburg. With its strange ceremonial halls and its walls adorned with ancient artifacts, it had been transformed into a cathedral for Himmler's new cult. It was into this dark fairy tale world that another German scholar was drawn in 1936. His name was Otto Rahn, and he offered Himmler the possibility of securing the most powerful ancient relic of all, the Holy Grail.
For me, Otto Rahn was the original Man in Black, the spook at the black fedora and black coat, the shadow out of history. Trying to penetrate who Rahn really was is certainly a tricky one.
As a boy, Rahn had been obsessed with the legends of King Arthur and the story of a knight called Parzival, who had searched his whole life for the Holy Grail.
At some point after leaving school, Otto seems to have become increasingly determined to find the Grail itself, a mythical object which will really make one whole again, which will heal the wounded and heal the world's pain. The lost link between man and God.
For Rahn, the Grail wasn't just a literary subject, it was a real physical object. And he was looking for anything that might have clues to that.
Rahn had found inspiration in the work of a 19th century German archaeologist, Heinrich Schliemann, who in 1873 had discovered the real lost city of Troy, a place once dismissed as purely mythical. At the time, Schliemann's discovery was an international sensation, and his method was revolutionary. He'd found the legendary city by following clues locked away in the text of Homer's The Iliad, turning fiction into historical fact.
When Rahn came across this, he got very excited because he thought, well, if Schliemann can do that with the Odyssey and the Iliad and Homer's works, then I might be able to do that with Parsifal.
Parzival is the story of a knight's quest for the Holy Grail, culminating in its discovery at the mythical castle of Munzelwasch, high on a lonely mountain. Like Schliemann, Rahn searched the text for clues to the location of the legendary Grail castle. His quest took him to France in 1931. And he travelled south to an area of the French Pyrenees locally known as Grail Country, a region that still entices Grail hunters to this day. There, high in the mountains, he caught his first glimpse of the ancient fortress of Montségur. Could this isolated ruin really be Parzival's Munzelwasch, the home of the Holy Grail? Its impregnable location certainly matched the text, but there was another more significant clue. One not based on myth, but on hard historical fact. In the 13th century, at around the time the Parzival legend was written down, Montségur had been the scene of the last stand of a dissident religious order known as the Cathars, the legendary keepers of the Grail.
The Cathars were the biggest threat the medieval church faced and were dubbed the Great Heresy as a result. They were a fully independent counter-church, totally opposed to the Church of Rome.
But Rome would not stand for their heresy, and in 1209, the Pope ordered a bloody crusade against the Cathars. This crusade saw the slaughter of over 100,000 people, making it one of the bloodiest events in European history, the genocide of an entire faith.
The papal legate is said to have issued the notorious command, "Kill them all, God will know his own." It was a pretty bloodthirsty period. There was general rape, pillage and looting, mass burnings and executions, whole towns being put to the sword. The one major place that the Cathars were still holed up and the one major castle that hadn't fallen was Montségur.
The castle was besieged for months, until eventually the few hundred remaining Cathars had no option but surrender. But something did survive the Inquisition's flames. In 1931, more than 700 years later, Otto Rahn unearthed a local legend about a mysterious Cathar treasure.
One of the legends that's grown up around the Cathars is that they possessed a treasure. During the siege, 4 Cathars are said to have scaled down the side of Montségur in the middle of the night with something, the Cathar treasure. History stops when those 4 men went down the side of Montségur into the night and vanished.
This legend was the clue that Rahn had been searching for. The Cathar treasure must be the Grail, and it had remained hidden ever since their fall. Acting on local folklore, Rahn spent many months crawling through the hundreds of miles of subterranean passages that riddle the mountains surrounding Montségur. As he dug deeper, he began to believe that these ancient heretics were not Christians at all, but believers in something far older, a lost religion. Finally, out of money, Rahn was forced to abandon his quest and wrote a book about the persecuted Cathars, their ancient religion, and what he believed to be the truth about the Grail.
Otto Rahn published in 1933 a book called The Crusade Against the Grail. Although it got some good reviews in Germany and sold modestly, he certainly wasn't a successful author at the time.
But one of Rahn's readers was utterly captivated by the book and was eager to meet with the young Grail hunter in person.
He's said to have received a telegram in 1934 saying, "Your book's very interesting. I'd like to talk to you. Could you please come to Berlin?" So he went back to Berlin and went to the address given on the telegram, and the man who sent the telegram was none other than Heinrich Himmler. And he later said, "What was I supposed to do? Turn Himmler down?"
Himmler wanted power. He wanted power more than anything. I mean, Hitler was superstitious, but Himmler was obsessed with the occult and the esoteric. For him, the Grail represented that. It represented power.
For Himmler, the Grail was an extremely seductive prospect. It was the ultimate religious keystone, and he believed its true power was not Christian, but Aryan. And Rahn had brought it within reach.
I think we can clearly imagine that initially Otto Rahn and Heinrich Himmler were very much on the same page. I think they both dreamed of overthrowing Christianity as we know it and creating a new European religion, something which drew on the myths of their ancestors and of a return of the old gods.
Himmler offered Rahn 1,000 Reichmarks a month to continue his research, with the only condition being that he must join the SS. During 1935 and 36, Rahn travelled incessantly, often accompanied by a small troop of SS men. He travelled through Italy, France and Spain, as well as venturing north through Scotland as far as Iceland. His reports were marked top secret and were for the eyes of Himmler and his closest advisors alone. He recorded his journeys in his second book, an enigmatic travel diary that contained little information about the true purpose of his many trips, but was full of chilling Nazi rhetoric.
Otto Rahn published a second book called Lucifer's Court in 1937, and there's definitely an anti-Semitic thread where the Cathars are seen as effectively good Aryans fighting the evil Judaic menace of the Church of Rome.
We are the people of Nordic blood, who call ourselves the Cathars. Our heaven speaks only to the pure ones, not to the base or mixed race creatures, but to Aryans, the noble and lordly. We did not pray to Jehovah because his divinity was a god for the Jews. Only the Jews have the arrogance to claim themselves divine as God-chosen people.
Critics are divided as to how much of this was Rahn's own belief or how much of it Rahn was putting in there just to please Himmler and to basically keep his own head.
In Germany, the whole of European history was being Nazified. Just as Wirth's Atlanteans had become the ancient Aryans, so too had Rahn's beloved Cathars. But time was running out for Otto Rahn. He still hadn't found the Grail, and he had even bigger problems.
The truth of the matter was that Rahn had Jewish blood through his mother. And a second problem was that Otto was gay.
Rahn had done a deal with the devil, and he was about to realize the price he would need to pay. In 1937, having failed to deliver the Grail, and possibly as punishment for his homosexuality, Rahn was assigned to guard duty in Himmler's new network of concentration camps. Here, he was finally confronted with the true terror of the Third Reich.
The SS, in many ways, embodies all the things that Rahn most feared. They're not the spiritual inheritors of the Cathar tradition, they're the spiritual inheritors of the Crusaders and the Inquisitors.
In February 1939, Rahn resigned from the SS, effectively signing his own death warrant. He travelled to Austria and walked alone, dressed in black, into the Alps.
It's thought that he sat down underneath the tree and took sleeping pills and simply fell asleep underneath the tree and froze to death.
Right up until his death, Otto Rahn believed that the Grail remained safely hidden in the countryside surrounding Montségur. He wrote,
It lies in a cave in the Tabor forest. A massive stone block protects the cave's entrance from intruders, and the treasure itself is guarded by hundreds of vipers.
But Rahn's failure was not going to stand in Himmler's way. He remained determined to re-establish his fictitious Aryan culture. And he was about to launch his most ambitious mission yet, seeking the master race in the most unlikely of places. Amongst the buried files of the Ahnenerbe were hints that during 1937, a change was taking place inside Himmler's private research institute. The search for the evidence of the master race was becoming more urgent. Hermann Wirth, the man who had helped link the Aryans to the lost island of Atlantis, had been fired and sent back into academic obscurity. But Himmler's faith in the power of the mythical Aryans remained utterly unshakable. Buried in the files is a letter from Himmler that demonstrates the depth of his bizarre beliefs.
Have the following researched. Find all places in the northern Germanic Aryan cultural world where an understanding of the lightning bolt, the thunderbolt, or Thor's hammer exists. I'm convinced that this is not based on natural thunder and lightning, but rather that it is an early, highly developed form of war weapon of our forefathers. Heil Hitler.
Himmler's attempt to find his very own hammer of the gods was perhaps unsurprisingly a failure. And yet, however far-fetched his projects may seem today, his appropriation of history was becoming accepted fact inside Germany. Himmler's sponsorship of the 1938 Tibetan expedition was also inspired in part by his fantasy of a master race. And he hoped the 5 SS men camped high in the Himalayas would help prove his strangest Aryan theory of all. He had never forgotten Hermann Wirth's ideas and believed that after the great flood that had sunk the island of Atlantis, a few survivors had sought refuge in the high places of the world. Some of these intrepid Aryans had arrived in ancient Tibet, and amongst the snow-capped peaks founded a great civilization. And now Himmler hoped to find the proof, but no longer in the form of carvings or lost relics, but in real flesh and blood.
The truth is even darker, I think. The reason I say that is to do with Bruno Bega and the reason he was on the expedition.
Bruno Bega was one of the 5 scientists sent to Tibet. His particular field of expertise was the study of people known as physical anthropology, a discipline that had become an important science inside Nazi Germany.
Physical anthropology was an academic discipline that was quite well developed by the 1930s. Himmler and his physical anthropologists thought that by measuring people's heads, you could tell what race they were.
By 1938, Nazi anthropologists had established a checklist of physical features that defined every racial type, including the Aryans. Amongst the expedition's other scientific aims, Bega was sent to catalogue the racial makeup of the Tibetan people, a project Himmler hoped would unearth traces of Aryanism in the secluded people of Tibet.
He was looking for the biological traces that would have been left in the living peoples of Central Asia. The investigation he carried out was meticulous. It's a kind of mathematics of race, if you like. What makes it sinister is that the gathering of data was being driven by an ideology. This ideology is founded on the idea of there being separate races and a racial hierarchy. And at the top of the hierarchy, of course, are the Nordic or Aryan people.
In Bega's final report, there is a reference to small traces of the Nordic race present in the anthropology of the people of Tibet. No doubt to Himmler, this was the remnant of the master race that he had been expecting to find. If Aryan blood did survive in Tibet, then the entire fantasy of Atlantis, a lost religion, and a once great people must be true. But for Himmler, Tibet's fallen Aryans were ultimately a moral lesson from history, an example of what happens if the racially superior interbreed with inferior races.
Over time, these superior Nordic peoples mixed with the lesser peoples that they ruled. And as a result, they themselves decayed as a culture. The empire fell. And the implication of that was that miscegenation, mixing with inferior races, was very dangerous. Your own superior race would be brought low by the lesser peoples that surrounded you. Racial mixing, from their point of view, is the road to catastrophe.
Himmler and the rest of the Nazi elite were determined that no such catastrophe would befall their Third Reich. Inferior races had to be controlled. Of all the many quests that Himmler helped launch, the Tibetan expedition was the most celebrated.
When they arrive at Munich airport, they're met by Himmler personally on the runway, and they're treated like celebrities, like heroes. They've done what no German expedition has ever done before, which is to get to Lhasa. It was a fantastic propaganda coup for Himmler, the head of the SS.
Only a month after the return of the expedition, the Nazis invaded Poland. The Second World War had begun. As the war tore its way across Europe, the Nazi obsession with race triggered one of the most appalling crimes in human history: the systematic extermination of 6 million Jewish people. And the Nazi leader responsible for delivering the final solution was none other than the man who had been so committed to finding the mythical Aryans, Heinrich Himmler. All the ridiculous theories and corrupted science had ultimately served a fiction of the master race, a fiction that had been used to help justify the Holocaust.
It is a kind of camouflage. You are committing a grotesque atrocity, but you are camouflaging its anti-humanism by dressing it up as a scientific necessity. The ideas that they subscribe to pave the way for the possibility of people imagining that it is morally necessary to liquidate an entire race.
But the Ahnenerbe's role in the Holocaust was far from over. In 1942, they were engaged to help Himmler solve a problem at the heart of the genocide. In spite of their obsession with race, the Nazis had failed to find the racial characteristics that defined who was a Jew and who was not.
Himmler was very much aware of the strong degree of arbitrariness involved in the definition of races, and Himmler thought that there must be better ways of doing this, more scientific basis for it. And he was, of course, the man who was charged with organizing and implementing the extermination of the Jewish people. And as a rather pedantic, precise man, he wanted more precise definitions.
The documents reveal that the Ahnenerbe was charged with finding these definitions. Definitions that would ultimately determine who should live and who should die. The project was assigned to an infamous medical doctor by the name of August Hirt.
August Hirt was already a member of the SS, and he was eager to get ahead in the organization. For this reason, he was particularly open-minded.
Dr. Hirt had already turned his back on medical ethics, conducting a series of horrific experiments on live prisoners at Natzweiler concentration camp. In 1942, he turned his attention to discovering the one universal measurement of Jewishness. He decided he would require the services of a physical anthropologist, and the Ahnenerbe provided none other than Bruno Beger, the scientist who led the anatomical measurements in Tibet. In the summer of 1943, Beger and a small team were dispatched to Auschwitz, signaling the beginning of one of the Nazis' most infamous war crimes.
Beger arrived in Auschwitz in the beginning of June, and first of all, he had the task of selecting 150 Jews, men and women. Beger came into the main camp, and he took quarters in the hospital area, and from there, he did his investigation. He thought about whom he should select. He wanted to select a cross-section of all the Jews present.
Not long after Beger arrived at the camp, Elizabeth Klein, a 42-year-old Viennese Jewish woman, was ordered to line up in front of the infirmary, along with 150 other prisoners. She was to be measured by Beger and his team.
He used the caliper rule. He had tables in which he recorded the eyes. He recorded the color of the eyes, the distance between the eyes, the distance between the ears, the size of the ears, the shape of the forehead, and so forth.
Having measured Elizabeth, Beger read her prisoner number aloud, and it was added to a list. Elizabeth had been chosen to be part of one of the Nazis' most macabre war crimes, the Jewish skeleton collection. On July the 30th, 1943, at Auschwitz concentration camp, a small group of prisoners were loaded onto a transport. Their destination was another death camp known as Natzweiler. They were to become victims of what is known as the Jewish skeleton collection. It was a project that put the Ahnenerbe at the heart of the final solution, and a medical doctor known as August Hirt was in charge of the operation. He turned his attention to Himmler's problem of how scientifically to identify Jewishness, and decided he was missing some key research material.
What was missing was a collection of anatomical materials that could be used to study and refine their knowledge of what it was to be a Jew. And this perception that there wasn't enough skeletal material had murderous consequences.
In 1943, Dr. Hirt began creating his collection of Jewish skeletons. He was adamant that by measuring and tabulating a diverse sample of Jewish bones, he would at last discover the elusive scientific definition of the Jewish race. But first, the prisoners would have to die. On the 2nd of August 1943, 86 of the Jewish men and women Bruno Beger had selected at Auschwitz arrived at Natzweiler concentration camp. At around 9 p.m. 9 days later, the female prisoners were taken to the camp's gas chamber, where they were murdered. Among them was Elizabeth Klein. But the skeleton collection would never be completed. Before the bodies could be prepared, the tide of war turned decisively against the Nazis as Allied troops advanced across Europe. Faced with the imminent liberation and his own arrest, Dr. Hirt panicked.
Knowing well that the dead bodies were the result of a crime, he asked Himmler, "What should I do with this collection? Should we keep it? Should we keep it partly? Or should we destroy it?" Then the instruction came back from Berlin to destroy the collection.
Hirt abandoned his research and fled back into Germany. A month later, French troops discovered what remained of his victims. In a ghoulish attempt to conceal his war crime, Hirt had mutilated the bodies. As the Allied advance continued and the Nazi state crumbled around him, Himmler began to systematically destroy the evidence of his bizarre and chilling projects. The files of the Ahnenerbe, containing the details of his Aryan quests and some of the pseudoscience behind the Holocaust, were hidden in the small cave in central Germany.
It's estimated that perhaps 200,000 individual Germans were involved in enacting the destruction of millions of lives. So, of course, the question is, why did they do it? I think one answer to that is that the ground had been prepared intellectually. German state apparatuses fostered a racial science, racial philosophy that made it possible to imagine that it was appropriate morally to liquidate a race.
In the days after the Nazi surrender, Dr. August Hirt took his own life. In 1974, Bruno Beger eventually stood trial for his part in the Jewish skeleton collection and was convicted of being an accomplice to murder, as the court ruled that he was unaware of what would happen to the prisoners after the measurements were taken. Himmler, the driving force behind so much of the Nazi corruption of science, and the man who delivered the final solution, cheated justice and took his own life on May the 23rd, 1945, whilst in British custody. He is buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in the wilderness of Lüneburg Heath in northern Germany. The victims of the Jewish skeleton collection were eventually identified and are buried at the Jewish cemetery in Strasbourg.
Their story is a warning from history that science can be corrupted. There are consequences to ideas. There are consequences to mythologies. And those consequences at that time was the annihilation of millions of people.